Mike Green's office is here. Would you like, please come forward? He's the only one tonight, right? There's nobody else. Oh, but real quick, you're gathering signatures for Paul Mitchell, right? I guess it's circulating already? Okay. If you want to sign it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Greg. First item I think we're going to put under the category of either good news or potential good news. It has to do with the personal exemption on the Michigan income tax. This is pretty much hot off the press. There was a meeting this afternoon, started at 2:30. I believe it was the Senate Finance Committee, and they were looking at three different bills. First one is Senate Bill 748, and I'm going to try to sound like a CPA for the next minute, so do not ask me to do your income taxes later tonight, but we'll try to sound as accounting savvy as I can. This bill, if it is adopted, does the following. It would specify the number of personal and dependency exemptions that a taxpayer would be allowed and delete language under which the return of the number of exemptions depends on the number allowed on a taxpayer's federal return. If you forget everything else, here's the key thing to remember. This would increase the personal exemption from the current $4,000 to $4,500 for the 2018 tax year, increase it to $4,600 for the 2019 tax year, and $4,700 for the 2020 tax year. You may have heard that the governor also wants to make some improvements, but his numbers are a little bit lower. I think for that first year, I think he's looking at $4,000 for the personal exemption. The question that should automatically come to your mind, how much of the taxpayers' dollars are going to be saved if this does get implemented? Anybody want to take a wild guess what kind of numbers we're talking about during the first year? Supposedly, St. James in the back row, I think, said $150 million. That is correct. By the end of the third year, that's probably going to be up to $200 million. And that depends on the timing of the legislation, if it is approved, when it actually gets implemented, and there's a chance that this could be made retroactive. So those numbers are kind of based on facts, but not, locked in stone. The committee today also talked about Senate Bill 749, dealing with income tax credit and child care credit, and the last one was 750, the treatment of exemptions by a city that actually levies an income tax. I think Gary tonight might be talking about a companion bill that was introduced in the House. I think the language is a little bit different, but at least we do seem to have some consistent activity both in the House and the Senate. And as all of you experts of state government know, if they do approve something and if they're not identical, it goes to conference committee and maybe they compromise somewhere in the middle. Mike is either the sponsor or co-sponsor of 6 different bills. I think 5 of these have been approved dealing with what they call the Enhanced Michigan Education Savings Program. Many of you, I think, have heard of what they call the 529 program, trying to get a chance for parents and grandparents to be a little bit more involved in their kids' or grandkids' education. This program, as is proposed, would actually kind of modify that program so that some of these expenses actually during the K-12 education would apply, not just the post-high school. Some of the details, I think, are still being worked out. There would be somewhat of an expense to a local school district or an ISD, but I think most people would argue that, if we can get our kids better educated and at the high school level, sometimes there are, they either call them pay for play or they have fees that are involved. So if we can kind of, get some good benefit at the K-12 level, this might work out. I believe Senate Bill 544 through 548, I think those have been approved in the Senate, and I think they've been sent over to the House. Some of you might remember our success on CPL legislation the last couple of years has not been quite as consistent as we'd like. We do have a governor who sometimes is not as pro-Second Amendment as we'd like him to be. However, we did have a success a couple months ago. Mike introduced what was called Senate Bill 219. I'm pleased to report it is now Public Act 95. I've got a 5-page summary. I'm not going to give you all those details, but if you want real specifics, meet me in the back row after the meeting. But just a quick summary. This requires the determination of an applicant's disqualification due to mental health or criminal history to be based solely on a report from the Michigan State Police. Deletes a provision under which a person could submit only one application for a concealed pistol license in any calendar year. Requires the county sheriff to notify the county clerk if the sheriff determines that an applicant for an emergency CPL is not eligible for license due to mental health and or criminal history. Includes a peace officer who owns a CPL in the list of license holders who are exempt from the law's prohibition against carrying a concealed weapon on certain premises. Some people call them no-carry zones. We might have a slightly different term for that type of a deal. And it revises requirements for a receipt of a CPL renewal application. I think in one case you had to wait by a first-class mail to get something. Now, I take that back. You had to do it in person. Now I think you can do it by first-class mail. So hopefully there will be not as much of a delay as there has been in the past. If you have a very good memory, you remember some legislation that Mike introduced. I think this was 3 years ago, dealing with ballast water. I'm not an expert when it comes to agriculture, ag processing, but this is an issue that's very important to farmers, agriculture, ag processing. Right now, Michigan, I think, is being penalized by the vast majority of the shippers. They are not allowed to either dump their ballast water under Michigan controlled waters. Quite often near Windsor, they just go a couple miles towards Canada, they dump the water, and it's kind of a pretty sad case. So we now have House Bill 5095. I think this has been modified somewhat from what Mike introduced a couple years ago. Representative Dan Lowers is kind of the spearheading person. Again, our governor has a little bit of a challenge or an issue with this. Apparently somebody has convinced him that new invasive species might be a problem. So Dan is trying to talk with the governor's office, get this approved. If it is approved, it will bring the state standards here in Michigan in line with federal standards. And that's legislation, I think, that we talked about a couple months ago. You know, why do we need to have regulations in Michigan that for some reason are more strict than at the federal level? Great time for one last topic maybe, or? All right. Okay. Again, some of you have heard of a guy by the name of Timothy Nash. He is, I think, what they call a macroeconomist with Northwood University in Midland. He apparently is in charge of kind of a annual type of a study. We compare Michigan, I think, to all 49 states as far as probably 20 different activities when it comes to the economy. Again, some of these terms I learned way back in 11th grade economics class, but they're not quite as fresh in my memory, so I'm going to be a little bit general. But this program is now in its 6th year, and we in Michigan were ranked number 47 out of 50. This was based on data from 1998 to 2012. They got some new data in 2016. We moved up to number 25. And apparently they now got some updated information as of last year. And this, I think, actually compares 2017 to the beginning of the Great Recession in 2009. Michigan now ranks the 9th most competitive economy in the country. And Dr. Nash talks about tax increases or tax revenue legislation. I think the number of pro-business bills or legislation that has been introduced. But if we can go from 47 to 25 to 9, that is a pretty impressive summary in my book. Last item, there's another study, and this is an audience participation question. Can anybody tell me what industry or what company has a very simplistic way of telling us how our economy is doing, and particularly in regards to any population shift that we have within? Say that again. Very good. You get a gold star on your report card. It says as follows. After Michigan suffered several years ago by being the state with the most people leaving the state of Michigan, there is now a roughly even flow of people moving in and moving out according to data from United Van Lines. Better yet, Michigan was best in the region. I think they're talking about probably Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, maybe West Virginia, I'm not too sure. The report also noted that the state lost people due to retirement, but had more people moving in for work-related reasons than leaving for work-related reasons. So the next time you see a United Van Line vehicle not too far, let's hope that they are actually helping somebody move in, even though there are some people moving out. And again, you get the gold star for being the United Van Line expert of the evening. Thank you kindly. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, Gary's still on his way. Real quick, I just want to review that it's always a big election in Michigan. This year, it's the governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general. I think 2 Supreme Court judges. I think they're both Republicans, so if we lose them both, the Democrats have got a majority on the state Supreme Court. That's bad. Your state senator is up, your state rep is up, your congressman's up, your county commissioners are up. Locally, I think probate judge Justice Scott is up. I don't think anybody else on the judges. And of course, you have your University of Regents, appeals court judge, and two ballot proposals we know of. One was legalizing marijuana, and the other one is the redistricting thing, which I am get kind of upset about because I've seen a preliminary report that we're already going to lose a congressman next census. We're going to go from 14 to 13. And when that happens, it doesn't matter whether they eliminate a Republican or Democrat. It means you're going to have gerrymandering. They're trying to eliminate that, but, and I could be wrong on this, the Voting Rights Act kind of guarantees you can't eliminate the black congressman. There's 2 of them. So I'm not sure about that, but if they can't, well, there's gerrymandering right there because you got to cut up the district of the black voters to keep the 2 black congressmen, and that spreads it out through southeastern Michigan, no matter which party wins. Because the 1st district is your Upper Peninsula, and I think it comes down to about Gaylord or somewhere around there. That's your 1st district. And the rest, you know, it's part of our state's problem is geography. You know, we're shaped like a mitten. Like the 10th district is one you're in now. That's mostly your thumb area. And you've got one over on the west coast, kind of like Kalamazoo, that slice there. So there's really not a whole lot you can do. So it just kind of bugs me the way they're doing it because it's just going to be gerrymandering in another way. They say you're eliminating it, but they're not. So just keep that in mind and tell all your friends. It's always a big election in this state, and it's going to matter. Your vote will matter, especially on the state Supreme Court. And, of course, governor, attorney general, secretary of state. The Democrats win those, then they start, you know, the secretary of state can legalize voters that maybe we don't want legalized. So always give it careful consideration and just let your friends know. And perfect timing. Our state rep is here. Hate to rush you right into it, but we've used up everything else. So without further comment, your state representative, Gary Howell from North Branch. Gary?
Thank you. Yep. Thank you, folks. prefer not to use the microphone if you can hear me all right. I think that kind of distorts things. Talking with Tim and with Greg, they indicated that the main topic for tonight is going to be these various ballot proposals. So I'm going to do a bit of research and hope we can answer at least most of the questions that might come up on them. I apologize for being late. The roads are actually atrocious getting from Lansing to here. I think my top speed was 45 miles an hour, and then it was quite a bit less than that as I was trying to tail some trucks. So anyway, I made it, and that's what's important. There are a number of ballot issues that have been proposed, but there are only 3 that have any credible possibility of going to the voters. That's because of the petition signature requirements. Right now, there are 3 that appear. It's not final because the Secretary of State has to certify the signatures, but it appears there's 3 of them that have enough signatures to go forward. Those are the ones on redistricting, legalization of recreational marijuana, and prevailing wage repeal. There's also the one kind of hanging out there on part-time legislature. I'm very skeptical they're going to get the signatures on that. We can chat about that as well, but I'd like that to the end because the other 3 are going to be real for certain in terms of action this year. There are 2 different ways that you can get on the ballot with an issue in Michigan. 2 of the proposals this year, marijuana and prevailing wage, are what we call initiatives. In an initiative, you collect a couple 100,000 signatures, submit them to the legislature, and the legislature is given a chance for an up or down vote only. No amendments, no adjustments. You vote yes or no. If we, as a body, the House and the Senate vote, were to vote yes on marijuana or yes on prevailing wage, it becomes law automatically without the signature of the governor. The governor is not in the equation for initiatives. So that's the legal situation as to marijuana and prevailing wage. The redistricting one is a referendum. With that, the petitions do not involve the legislature. And if they have enough signatures, that will go directly to the voters, redistricting. So you got slightly different procedures in the 2. I'll do marijuana first just because that's pretty clear what that is all about. As you know, the voters approved medical marijuana some years ago. There's been lots of contention and adjustment on that over the years. This proposal would expand that dramatically and essentially make us like Colorado, California, and the half-dozen states that have made marijuana for recreational purposes legal. Now there's a whole series of procedures, as you can imagine. Quite lengthy, actually. It kind of looks like the Obamacare bill. Extremely fine print, very long, containing a number of different standards and regulations. But when you cut through it all, it's pretty straightforward. Do you want to legalize recreational marijuana in Michigan? If you do, you vote yes. If you don't, you vote no. The legislature could pass it. I don't think it will. My attitude on both of those, marijuana and prevailing wage, is that I'm going to not be supportive of passing them into law. Because if we pass it into law, the people are aced out. They have no right to make a decision. So my attitude is, these are overwhelmingly public issues, they should go to the voters. The redistricting one probably has the signatures, but I don't have a vote on that. It's going to go forward. It will probably face significant legal challenges. It's incredibly complex. It makes the marijuana one look simple. This is redistricting. You have up to 7 pages of incredibly fine print about that. And it's like Rube Goldberg or Alice in Wonderland, I'm not sure which, it would create a commission. Now, as you know, in the United States, historically, forever, legislatures have done redistricting for the House of Representatives and the Senate of the state and for the congressional delegation. The way I see it, that system has served us well as a democracy. Certainly it served us well here in Lapeer County. We have been our own district for 20 years now. Only Lapeer County. And the reason we can be our own district is there's some population variance in the current system. So if you're within a fairly tight range, you get a district. So Lapeer, because they are under the current law required to follow municipal boundaries and required to be compact and contiguous, Lapeer has had what I think is a good fortune to have a district which is just Lapeer County. So when I'm talking to my constituents, if you live in Lapeer County, I'm the guy to talk to. There is so much confusion in many areas where these boundaries cross and cut townships in half, cut school districts apart, cut cities apart. Hard for people to know who's really responsible and where the district lines go. With compact and contiguous, as we use now, the Thunder has been treated remarkably well, I think. Lapeer is one district by itself. Tuscola and Huron, because of smaller population, are one district together by themselves. So if you're in Huron and Tuscola, Ned Canfield's your guy. Over in Sand Lac, the whole county is one district. Because the population is smaller, the city of Port Huron is added to Sand Lac. Then the balance of St. Clair County is in a separate district. So it's all very logical. You're not playing political games. We don't vote in the 82nd district predominantly Republican because of where we drew the lines. The fact is, like it or not, Lapeer County is a Republican county. So the Republicans are going to win in most every case, not always, but most cases. Go to the city of Detroit, the opposite is true, obviously. We have districts there that we managed to lose by 95%. Under the proposal as suggested in their citizen commission concept, it's truly amazing to me. I read through it in preparation for tonight. It's even the same year than I understood before. There will be a 13-member commission. This 13-member commission will be drawn totally at random. The Secretary of State will draw 10,000 names from the voter roll across the state and would solicit anybody else that wanted to apply. So God knows how many numbers we're talking about. And then you self-identify as to whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. And of course, there's no way to check that in most cases except your internal conscience. But clearly, if you want to declare next week, if I was an elected official, I could say, hey, I'm a Democrat, put me on here. I'll treat it fairly. So they have 13 commissioners drawn from 10,000 names, 4 of which are self-identified as saying they're Republican, 4 are saying they're Democrats, and 5 are saying they're independents. Then, after you get down to these separate pools, you randomly select 60 out of all the pools, the people that qualify. And out of the 60, then you get to select the ones you want. After giving the Democratic and Republican leaders of the House and Senate a veto power over any particular name. So they could go through and strike a few names. Well, I don't know how they strike them, we can figure out who people are. So then you get down to this commission of 13 members, which by definition has no political experience whatsoever. You can't so much as have been a precinct delegate or a member of your local party committee. You're banned from being on here. So you're only going to be, by definition, getting people that are inexperienced at best, perhaps naive, who knows what your situation is going to be with these 13 folks that are selected by this multi-stage process. Then it gets turned over to the Secretary of State, who of course will be either a Democrat or Republican, depending on who wins the elections. Secretary of State will get to provide all the services to this commission. It wouldn't take a very crafty politician, if I was Secretary of State and I was a Democrat, to decide, well, I'm going to give these folks this consultant and this law firm and this background information. I mean, it'd be so easy to play games here if you are so inclined, which in politics, everybody's inclined. Then, after you go through, you get to have public hearings. Yes, please.
How do we get from 60 to the 13?
60 to 13 is a good question. Well, first you give the legislative leaders the veto power over some names, and then you go back to the random draw again.
Random draw.
Right. Every stage has got random draws in it. So, who knows what you're going to get? Other than somebody has said, I'm willing to do this, and they get these three pools. There's Dems, there's Republicans, there's Independents, as they identify themselves. Then you randomly draw and you get down to the 13 number. But then you're just getting started. The part that I find particularly, and there's numerous public hearings, there are public hearings all over the state on this thing. It says the legislature should provide the money needed to run this thing, but it says the commission shall have right to sue the legislature if they don't think we give them enough money.
Oh,
so they're often running with whatever they think they need to get this job done. Before they draft their plan, the first plan, they got to hold 10 public hearings around the state. This is before you've done anything. Just do whatever else to say. Soliciting information to the public. Then you develop a plan, at least one proposed plan. Then you do 5 more public hearings on that. Here's my favorite one, numerous favorite parts here. As a commission member, you are banned by the Michigan Constitution if this thing passes, from discussing any redistricting matters with members of the public outside of the public hearing. So other than sitting at the hearing, which will be orchestrated, I can guarantee as all public hearings tend to be, I can't go back to my time and say, hey guys, what do you think about this plan? Because I'm not in a public hearing of the entire commission. So we want to make sure we keep these people as ignorant as possible about what folks are thinking, unless you're one of the people that gets to speak at one of these public hearings. Otherwise, you're aced out as members of the public. So now they develop a plan. They get the plan developed. They got to get a majority of commissioners. Okay, 7 out of 13 to do it. But it's not as simple as that. You get to the 7, you've got to have at least 2 commissioners from each party and at least 2 commissioners from the independent group to vote yes. So you've got to figure out who's who to vote yes. Then if you cannot get the majority, if you can't get several people to all agree on one plan, then every commissioner, say they got 10 plans, who knows how many plans they come up with. To get it down to 1, each commissioner shall rank the plans. So you look at the plan and you rank it 1 to 10. So being a Republican guy, you might plan a 10, and I give Greg's plan a 1. So you go through all this ranking among all 13 people. Then you add up all these numbers, and the one that wins the most rankings becomes the plan. Unless it's tied.
Yeah, Jerry, just 1 second there. Are you saying that this particular proposal has been approved for the ballot or the election process?
In all likelihood, they've turned in their signatures.
They've turned in the signatures?
And they've gotten a ton of signatures.
With this proposal? With this
what I'm telling you right now.
Really?
Yeah. Let me just finish one.
Yeah.
Now, because I know there's tons of questions. I can't do justice to the complexity of this thing. So we get a tie. Then, tie card here. So you get a tie between two of them, you do a random selection. Oh my God! So the key word is random at every stage of this thing. You get down to the bottom, so you make a random selection of the tie card. Okay, that's the plan. But then the Supreme Court can say, the Michigan Supreme Court is an original jurisdiction to look at it, and they can decide it doesn't meet whatever standard, send it back again, and start over.
Gary, this is like a year in a journey.
This is like the most Rube Goldberg thing I have ever read.
Common Core math? Is that how they learn this?
Yeah. One more part I got to share with you. Question. I know there's tons of questions. Every time I read it, I get more questions. All right. Under the current law, the law says explicitly the districts, as I said earlier, must be compact and contiguous and follow municipal boundaries wherever possible. To me, it seems like a rational thing. They have added a phrase saying you can draw these lines based on, quote, communities of interest, which shall not be limited to but may include cultural connections, historic connections, economic interests. So fundamentally, all bets are off. Instead of Lapeer County being, because of our geography being a district, they could say, well, Elbow Lee's a little Democrat and so does Marathon, so we're going to run those over to Flint and find they're culturally connected to Burton. And they go anywhere they want on this communities of interest thing. Or they can say, well, there's a lot of Hispanic folks here, we're going to tie them to some Hispanic folks over at Port Huron to make a community of interest. You can imagine what kind of districts you might end up with if you follow that. And then the best part is, there is no definition whatsoever of what a community of interest is. Zero definition. I mean, this is a lawyer's daydream. Any lawyer can have more fun with this gobbledygook. It's going to go on forever. And then the final one here is, it's got to be equal population. Now that sounds fair, right? Equal population. The current law we use says there can be a slight variation, small percentage variation, because obviously, if you're going to follow municipal boundaries, like Lapeer County has a smidge less than some other districts. We might have 1,000, roughly 90,000 per district. We might have 1,000 less. They come within a tight standard, but they want to follow these boundaries, so it's not with mathematical precision. They're going to want absolute equal population. That's what's currently being used for the United States Congress apportionments because of federal law. If you looked at a map of the state of Michigan of the federal apportionment, I defy you to see any sense out of it. You look at Detroit, and they've got these elongated districts that go like this from Detroit up and catch Pontiac. The reason for that is the federal law says you cannot reduce minority representation. Detroit's had 2 black districts for a number of years. Even though the population is shrinking, you don't have the choice of, for God forbid, you have a district with less than majority black population. So you've got to draw these gollywumgus lines, wherever it takes, to create those districts. Now, you can argue why you want one, whether that's right or wrong. That's what the law is at the federal level. And I could see that with this kind of language about communities of interest becoming a widespread standard, where you could have districts that could be, in the whim of this commission, could go anywhere covering any kind of group you could argue is connected in some cultural affinity or economic affinity. So, with that, I'll be happy to entertain questions.
Right, I'll run the mic for
All right, very good.
But this is why I wanted him to talk about this, because I didn't mention it to you, but I heard a report that we're losing one congressman in the next census.
That's true.
So we'll go from 14 to 13. That's only going to make all this worse. So that's why it's very important to vote against this and tell all your friends to do the same. Okay?
Gary, I was just wondering if you could tell us who's supporting this, and who created it, and how are they selling this to the public? Because if they explain it the way you did, obviously no one would support it.
Right. And obviously, they don't explain it the way I just did.
No.
They got a wonderful name for it. Is it people, not politicians? Is that the phrase they use? Something not politicians. So they're taking a swipe at us evil politicians that are using the current standard. But here's the amazing thing about this. I can't believe most people read this thing and signed it. I mean, it takes a major effort to read through this thing. They got a ton of volunteers. The League of Women Voters, a lot of liberal groups across the state took this on as a mission. And God bless them, they did a heck of a job. They got an absolute ton of signatures standing out at the polls, standing at meeting entrances, so on and so forth.
At our library.
Library. They were everywhere, you know. Much as I disagree with their political bent, they were effective.
You just sell it with a title.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the people, not the politics.
Yeah, get rid of the damn politicians, let the people decide.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not about to miss these 13 folks, I have 8 people, whoever they are. I think we get better representation. If the current law stays the way it is, and I am reelected a couple of times, which I'm allowed to do under term limits, I'll be voting on our new apportionment. Not for myself, because I'm going to be retired at that point. I'll be voting out for the next 10 years. With your elected officials doing it, you know who to talk to. You know where I am, you know where I live, you've got my phone number, you can tell me what you think.
You actually can talk to.
And you can talk to me anywhere you want to, in a coffee shop or wherever. This thing, to me, makes an unaccountable situation where the only avenue to even speak is going to be at these massive statewide public hearings. Good luck in getting 3 minutes to talk about little Lapeer County, where they're trying to... Pardon?
There's only 5 to go.
Right.
You have 10 before you do anything, and you get 5.
So anyway, the bottom line is, to answer your question, a number of liberal groups are pushing this because they have been unsuccessful in the last 2 apportionments of getting a liberal legislature. They've ended up with us instead. They don't like people like me being down there making these decisions. And again, I would argue that Lapeer County's interests, not only are the lines better for us under the current system, let's face it, most of us in Lapeer County lean conservative. I think it's in our interest as a county. We are leaning conservative and would prefer not to have more taxes and more regulation. We're better served if the system is set up to help conservatives rather than to help liberals. Just frankly. Maurice.
Yes, on this proposal, if you're going to put that on the ballot, how are you going to get the language on the ballot so it's understandable for somebody to digest and vote on that particular proposal, rather than the simple thing saying we're going to change the gerrymandering system? Explain that.
With your legal background, you put your finger right on the key point, I think. This thing is so long and complicated. To ask people to vote yes or no when there are so many things in it. They are amending multiple sections of the Constitution, doing a whole host of things. I think there's a real significant legal question about whether this is even a valid issue. And you can rest assured there will be litigation filed if these petitions are certified, which we think they will be. There will be litigation filed challenging this as being way too complex for a single yes or no question. Under the Michigan constitutional amendment process, you were supposed to have a single question in front of you. I mean, the marijuana thing is pretty straightforward. I mean, you either for it or against it. Everybody knows what marijuana is pretty much. You either like recreational marijuana or you don't. This thing has got so much in it that I bet money that 99.9% of voters voting on this are not going to have a complete understanding, because you can't get one from reading all this stuff. So I think you're right. I think there is a challenge coming up, and I think the challenge has got a good chance of winning. At least I hope so.
Before it even gets on the ballot.
Right. There'll be a legal challenge saying this thing does not meet constitutional muster because there's so many amendments in it that even if you like one section, you're being told by the whole thing or nothing else.
Yeah, but again, I think they got like 400,000 signatures, so you got 400,000 people ticked off, so are you going to do that as a politician? I don't know, but it was sold really as anti-establishment, and so people signed it without reading it, obviously. Oh, sure, I'm against that. It's the politician as well. That's why it's important. One of the things we do with the Tea Party is education. It's important that you vote against this if it comes out of ballot, because it might.
I'd like Gary to address what you introduced regarding the minority voter, if you could explain that a little bit better for us, and
Because
tell us which one we're losing, and so forth.
Because I mentioned it to him before you got here. You got 2 black congressmen. If we go to 13, you can't cut those 2. That guarantees gerrymandering even worse than we got it now.
Actually, if you look at the maps that currently exist, you'll see that the Michigan House and Senate are relatively rational maps. They tend to follow the municipal boundaries. The Democrats don't like them because they're not winning under them so far. But they follow contiguous, compact boundaries. You look at the federal one, and that's what Greg is touching on. In all likelihood, from population trends, we're going to lose a congressman. We've lost one every 10 years for a long time now, as our population stays static and the rest of the country grows. Because we lose a congressman, we've got to redraw the lines again, obviously. The Federal Voting Rights Act is what we're talking about here. The Voting Rights Act is the one that imposes the duty that you cannot diminish minority representation. So when we drop from 14 to 13, you've already got incredibly, if you look at the maps of the Detroit area on congressional level, unless you knew this, you'd say, what on earth are those people thinking when they drew those lines? I mean, it looks like some kind of a dragon going down, and they did 2 of them like this, down to snake around and try to find enough minority voters, because you've got to make it a majority-minority district, meaning not just that they'll elect a black congressman, but that the majority of voters in the district are black. So you've got to connect. And who knows, they may have to go to Flint next time to find enough folks. Obviously, I have no problem with, they should elect whoever they want for their congressman, fine with me. But to say that you've got to draw those lines just for racial reasons, I believe is fundamentally wrong. But that's the state of the law right now at the federal level.
Okay. Well, who are we losing?
I hope it doesn't.
What area, though?
Well, it's not, it's overall state.
It's
So
overall.
when we drop, like right now, the 1st district, the one that includes the Upper Peninsula, is the 2nd largest geographic district east of Mississippi. I mean, it's huge. You go from Ironwood to Sault Ste. Marie down a good third of the Lower Peninsula. And you're going to see that drop even further down because the UP is actually losing population. So that's going to be a massive district. And then the other 12 will be cut up somehow in southern Michigan. Like, to me, we're in jeopardy. We're left out on this congressionally because our district is very logical. It's the entire thumb, plus the northern portion of Macomb County. So it's a fairly cohesive geographic area. A lot of us have similar interests in this area. It makes it a logical district. But some of these things are just...
Who do you side with?
Under the current law, I would be voting on it as your representative. Right after the 2020 census. Once they finalize the numbers, then what's always happened in the past under our current Constitution is that the legislature is asked to draw the congressional districts, draw the Senate districts, draw the House districts. But the trouble is you got these 2 different standards. Our standard just for the state legislative districts is compact, contiguous, approximately equal population, whereas the feds have absolute 100% equal. You will see the lines drawn in to snake down 2 houses on one street because you've got to have, and I've got to make up a number because I don't know it, 722,406 people. And every district has to have precisely that number. So you've got to create a district that inevitably will have some oddball lines in it for that reason.
We got it up on the screen, kind of.
Yeah, this is good. This is our congressional layout. As you can see, the legislature, I think, did a pretty decent job with the outstate areas, given the standard they had to deal with. But you get down here, look at number 9. Up around like that.
Is that the 14th? That's
Yes,
almost a C?
14th goes like this. These are the 2 minority districts, the black districts, that they had to create, 13 and 14. So Pontiac is up here. See, it snakes up, takes over the city of Pontiac. And then it has to avoid these white areas, so it goes out here and around and down and then over to the lake. And then here, they had to create another one, so they went out and took in parts of the city of Detroit, and I don't know where the heck they went down here. But the reason these two districts look really oddball is because of that. And then because they had to do this, you had to create another oddball district because you had to work around the line you created for the first two. So you're kind of stuck. And you had to almost create this island situation here. I mean,
See, that's Wayne County, and North.
Wayne is here, Oakland is here,
Oakland.
Macomb here.
Yeah. See,
So what does this guy in St. Clair Shores have in common with this guy over here in
That's right.
Pontiac? I mean, nobody that was just drawing a logical map would draw that. But that's what you, so the net result is the districts down here around the metro area tend to be really oddball. And that is one of the big dangers of this new proposal. Because you could see other parts of the state ending up with districts like this when you start saying draw to include a community of interest or an economic group or whatever else we're talking about.
So expect much, if it passes, we get much more of that, those kind of lines as opposed to the big blocks of areas that we're.
It'll only get worse.
That's my guess. But, you know, with this 13-member oddball commission, God knows what we end up with. I mean,
And the federal law does not change, right?
So the federal law is there, so we're stuck with that for the time being. So unless the Supreme Court steps forward, which I love, they invalidated portions of the Voting Rights Act a few years ago, in which the southern states were forced to do all kinds of additional things, even though they'd long since outlawed segregation and so on. So that was eradicated. We've still got this part of the act. So assuming it's still in effect, whoever draws the lines, whether it's the legislature or this commission, you're going to unfortunately see this kind of thing in the Detroit metro area. I just would hate to see this go elsewhere.
Wow.
See, how did Grand Rapids not get?
Well,
Because they're the second largest city in the state.
right. And so Grand Rapids, this is the suburbs of Grand Rapids
Right.
here. They got put in this other district.
See,
But
they
again,
don't have-
that's an example of what, it had to be mathematical, 100% accurate. So you got to snake around and take in a few streets and somehow come up with, and it's so stupid, personal opinion. This is the 2020 census, right? That census is wrong first day it's over. I mean, people move, people adjust, grow families. Just make it 100% mathematical accurate because of one count on one day in April of 2020. Anyway.
So again, that's why it's so important for you to stay informed on this, okay?
Gary, does it say how often they can do this redistricting?
Yes, it hinges on the decennial census like it does now. So it's every 10 years.
Oh, just,
So under that law, or the current law, under current law, you could theoretically change it. I've not seen it done, except in the 1960s. But anyway, it'd be every census time.
Any other questions on any, or anything you want to ask them about upcoming legislation, or?
Well, let me touch on the other two. Jim, do you have one on this?
No, it's another question.
Okay, I'll look myself there. Let me just touch again very briefly on the other two. Because remember, this whole thing I just explained is a referendum. So that goes directly from the signatures to the ballot. So unless the legal challenge heads it off, you're going to be voting on this thing in November. The other two, marijuana and prevailing wage, they go to the ballot only if the legislature does not pass what's proposed. And there's the conundrum. We vote to pass the marijuana or the prevailing wage. It's got to be precise language. We can't amend anything. We've got to go either yes for everything that's in their wording or no. I'm voting no on both of those. And I feel different. I mean, as a value judgment, I would be inclined to be against the marijuana thing anyway, and I'd be inclined to be in favor of the prevailing wage one. But I have a major objection to the prevailing wage. They put in that a repeal of prevailing wage, which has been in effect since 1965, and they put in a $75,000 appropriation. The reason they put that appropriation in is to kill the voters' rights to vote on this. Under the Michigan Constitution, you can have a referendum on any law unless it's an appropriation. And so the game they've been playing in recent years is to put a tiny appropriation in a bill, That way the voters don't get to vote on it. I met today with the prevailing wage folks. I said, look guys, I'm a conservative, I agree with you on policy, but I think you are being unfair to the voter. Every other bill I vote on in Lansing, if I don't do what you think I should do, you can file for referendum and challenge me. But on this one bill, because they put that $75,000 in there, you would not have any right to vote. And just to give you, I'll answer this. To give you a little historical perspective, we did the same thing at the legislature before I was there. Emergency manager law, one of the biggest screw-ups in Michigan history. Emergency manager law was passed, the voters filed a referendum, the voters turned it down, so we don't want this. The legislature turned around in a matter of a very few months and passed another version of the same thing and threw an appropriation in it like this, so the voters could not vote on it. Well, I'll tell you, as a consequence of that, we taxpayers have paid a hell of a price of what our liability is for the various lawsuits coming out of the emergency management law. In my opinion, it's fundamentally wrong. The voters should have been listened to. Even if I disagree with it, if the voters have spoken, the voters have spoken. We ought to honor that. And my party's guilty of it. They did it. I'm a good Republican, but I don't agree with everything, and I do not agree with using a phony appropriation to prevent the voters from having a say. So we'll see what happens. If they get the votes to pass it, if it passes, it's law, that's that. If they cannot garner enough votes, which is 55 at the moment, then it will simply go to the ballot in November and the voters will decide.
So
yes.
The appropriation is if the legislature votes for it, then there wouldn't be the ability to subsequently collect signatures to put it on as a ballot proposal. Turn it down.
Right, right. They could start a different ballot proposal at some point in the future, but the voters would not be able to vote on what we voted on. And, that's my objection to it. Anyway, it's just it's sort of inside baseball in terms of the way the Constitutional provisions work. That's the background on that. So when you see me voting no, it's not because I'm not a good conservative. I just do not believe we should take away the voters' rights.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you real quick on prevailing wage. One argument I heard against it was you were the president of ISD for a lot of years, more or less a skilled trade school.
Right.
And one person said, well, if you do this, you take away financial incentive to learn a skilled trade because they could reduce your wage, and even though you know more than an average person. What is your thought on that?
I think there's some legitimacy to that argument. Here's the countervailing arguments, and there's good arguments on both sides of this. The argument in favor of eliminating it is it does cost additional money because you're going to pay union scale on public projects. So you're not going to take what could have been a lower bid if they paid a lesser wage. Well, that's the argument in favor of it. The argument against it is much what Craig just indicated, that some people argue that we have a shortage of skilled labor in this state. A significant shortage of skilled labor. We can't fill a lot of positions, whether it be electricians, iron workers, who go down the line. And there's some concern that repealing a law that's been in effect since 1965 that would reduce the wages of many of these folks is sending the wrong message if we were trying to encourage people to go into these trades. And you can weigh it out as you see fit. I have great faith in the voters to decide which way they want to go. Any other questions? Any ballot proposals?
It only pertains to government contracts, though, right? It doesn't have anything to do with private.
Bingo. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
And it only applies to a relatively few government contracts.
Right.
That's the other thing to bear in mind. When you talk prevailing wage, most people are thinking about the Davis-Bacon Act. That's the federal law that requires prevailing wage. Anytime there's $1 of federal money going into a project, you must pay prevailing wage. So when I was on the road commission, we paid prevailing wage on almost every project because almost always was some federal money coming down to aid the project. If you got any grant money at all, then it had to be prevailing wage. So we're talking here about a relatively small segment of public projects. For instance, as you know, the taxes were raised on all of us on gas and on vehicle registration not that long ago. So there's going to be a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars a year, 1.2 billion, is going to go into the roads over the next number of years. Virtually all road money involves federal matching funds. So whether we pass the prevailing wage repeal or not, you're still going to pay prevailing wage on all of those federal projects that are involved there. So you're probably talking some school buildings, maybe some small municipal projects, but you're talking about a much smaller share of the total number of projects involved. That's a good point.
Okay, any more? Okay, thank you, Gary. We'll probably let you go early tonight so you get through the snow and all that. We thank you for coming. And again, stay informed, okay? Your vote does matter. It's going to count big this year in a lot of projects. So we'll do our 50-50 real quick.
I just want to thank you folks for inviting me. I view it as a very important part of my job to report back to my district. You may not always agree with the way I vote, but I'll always tell you up front how I voted, why I voted that way, and I'm very interested in hearing from you. So, and I really appreciate the Tea Party. Not only because we're fellow conservatives, but because you provide a forum like this. Whether it be election debates, or there's something like this, there are very, very few places where you can talk directly to interested citizens. And I appreciate the opportunity to do it here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Gary.